Welcome, humans, to the Neuron AI Explained. I'm your host, Corey Noles, and I'm here, as always, with a man who has a spring in his step and a bot in his heart, our one and only Grant Harvey. How are you today, my friend?
I'm good. That description of me kind of sounds like I have a pacemaker, though.
It does. It does. I didn't even think of that.
But you know what? Very flowery description. I welcomely embrace it.
Excellent, excellent. I'm glad to hear it. Well, before we get started, I want to give a quick thank you to our sponsor for today's video, Dell AI Factory with NVIDIA. We're going to learn more about them in just a few minutes. But first, what are we talking about today, Grant?
Well, today we are talking about reinforcement learning environments. These are the training grounds where AI agents learn to plan, use tools, adapt, and make judgment calls across multi-step tasks. These environments are quickly becoming the bottleneck for real-world AI performance. And in 2025, they were one of the most aggressively funded and least understood parts of the AI stack.
So our guest today is Nick Heiner, head of RL environments at Surge AI, where he leads the company's reinforcement learning environments team. Before Surge, Nick was a founding engineer at Fixie, a senior engineer at Netflix working on UI platforms, and part of the US Digital Service. At Surge, he's helped build large-scale simulated workplaces like CoreCraft environments used by frontier labs to test whether models can actually do knowledge work end to end.
He's also the co-author of Surge's recent research showing that even the best models fail roughly 40% of the time on real workplace tasks, with failures clustering around planning, adaptability, groundedness, and common sense.
Nick, welcome to the Neuron. Great to have you.
Thank you. Happy to be here. You mentioned that it's one of the best funded but also least understood areas right now.
Do you agree with
There's a
that
tweet.
assessment?
Well, so there's a tweet that I love to poke fun at my VC friends with. It said a lot of VCs have become reinforcement learning experts in the last 3 months, and they're like, yeah, we know. Like we're piling in here, and there's still a lot to learn about the space.
Well, hopefully we can help out all of your VC friends and teach them a bit more direct from the horse's mouth here. I guess to start, how did you end up at Surge AI building RL environments, and what was the moment that you realized that this was the future of AI training?
So, I mean, the moment that I sort of left Netflix and went into AI startups in general was basically the first moment I used ChatGPT. And it was
Mm,
just, I'm sure everyone remembers where they were when they first used
I remember the
ChatGPT.
moment.
Right.
yeah.
It's just immediately obvious that this is something totally different. And, I love Netflix, but just didn't feel like a time to be at a 25-year-old company in a well-established space. It's like, this is a whole new field. So I came over to Surge, and at the time, everything was scaling up really fast. Like, Llama 2, GPT-3, sort of those initial models had come out, and everyone's looking at the scaling laws and saying, okay, now we just need to bump it up an order of magnitude, which means the entire supply chain needs to get bumped up an order of magnitude, of which we at Surge were a part. So when I first joined, I focused a lot on building out our expert network. And that has a bunch of pieces to it. There's the actual recruiting, but then there's things like, how do you vet people? How do you see who's the best at what type of tasks? How do you sort of apply quality checks to work at broader and broader scales? Um, then I transitioned to lead several of our client engagements, and that was during 2024. And the big thing there was like, again, in 2023, a lot of these models were being produced by like scrappy small bands of researchers at these labs. And then 2024, all those orgs scaled up from like 20 geniuses to like an org of 1,000 people. And, in much the same way, we had to scale up too. And they sort of had new expectations of us, higher levels of enterprise maturity, and then just being able to produce super high quality data for, 40 different research tracks at once instead of like a team of 20 that was focused on three. Um,
Wow.
so that was a big part of my work in 2024 was sort of scaling my teams to do that. And then 2025, focusing on RL environments. And a lot of the actual work had a very strong through line with stuff that we had already been doing with labs. Some of it was sort of tying existing pieces together. Some of it was just sort of a crystallization of a lot of other stuff we'd been doing. But then for me personally, it was more about sort of building the environments and less about like the managed service aspect.
Mm.
Okay. Well, I guess to start at kind of the basics here for to ensure everybody
For
who's
the
watching is
VCs.
on for the VCs. Let's keep it simple for the VCs. Uh, When someone hears reinforcement learning environment, what do they picture? Is it a data set, a simulated world in some way, a physical robot in a warehouse,
Yeah, yeah,
something way cooler?
that's a great question. And let me also say in defense of VCs, when I listen to their podcast, I don't understand half the jargon. So,
That's
we each
Fair
have
fair.
our
enough.
own worlds.
Same,
Um,
same.
anyway, so to describe RL environments, let's just talk about uh, all sort of the different training paradigms that have been, heavily used recently. So the first is supervised fine tuning, which is basically teaching by demonstration. So the analogy here is you're learning to golf, and you do it by watching 1,000 hours on YouTube of golf,
Mm.
and then you just try to figure out what they're doing. Then there's reinforcement learning from human feedback, which is when you golf, you have an instructor, you're at the driving range, you take 2 shots, and the coach tells you, okay, the first one was better. And they don't necessarily even tell you what was better about it. They just tell you one was better
Mm.
than the other, and you sort of try slightly different things every time, and you start to converge on like what is the best thing to do. And then reinforcement learning environments takes it a step further. And so instead of you're at the driving range and you're limited by the availability of the coach, which, to sort of say what it actually is, it's like you have humans looking at 2 responses from a model and choosing, thumbs up, thumbs down.
Mhm.
But that requires humans, right? Like you have to spend millions of hours to do that. The reinforcement learning environment is you're sent out in the golf course by yourself, and you get feedback from the environment of like, okay, the ball went close to the target. Um,
Right.
and in that way, you're able, again, to sort of self teach in a sense because you keep trying different things and then you keep getting that feedback of what worked and what didn't. And yeah, you do that for a million hours, and then all of a sudden you're a world class golfer.
I'll be dang. Makes me think of the thumbs up, thumbs down, do you like this personality button on ChatGPT I see all the time.
Yes, and that is exactly what they're doing, is they are
Okay.
collecting your user feedback. And so it's actually somewhat funny. We've had experts in our network who spend a lot of time, going in a lot of detail into these responses to assess which ones are better. And they get paid to do it. And when they see ChatGPT asking for that same information for free, like some of them have actually complained, sort of in like, I mean, not like, I mean, they're just sort of venting, like it's not a serious thing, but
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
anyway, but
yeah.
yes, but that is exactly what they're doing is they're gathering training data.
Okay. That's
Uh,
good to know. That's good to
well,
know.
well, the RL example with you're going out onto the golf course and you're trying to, based on the feedback that you get, adjust your game. That just to me feels like the most similar to how we humans learn in general. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, because like, if you ask me to learn how to golf just by watching YouTube videos, like I think I would truly struggle to do that. Um, However, the
Yeah.
reason it's taken us, this long to get this far is in part because it is substantially more complicated to build a training golf course for you than it is to give you an
Right.
iPad and say, here's 1,000 hours of Tiger Woods.
That's a
Right.
good call.
Right.
That's a good call. That makes sense.
And then I guess just to close the loop on this, what is the difference between pre-training and post-training and reinforcement learning?
Yeah, so reinforcement learning is a technique that's applied during post-training. Pre-training is the step where you basically have the model read, the whole internet. It's not actually the whole internet, but you just shove a bunch of tokens through the model. And that's what gives you a prior on language. It's what gives you like knowledge. And then post-training is what gives you behavior. So, the earliest example was, if you remember, in 2020, GPT-3 came out, and it was not a chat-tuned model. Like, it would not have a conversation with you. It would literally just, your prompt is a document, and it just writes whatever it thinks the rest of the document is going to be. Um, so the way to sort of induce it into having a conversation with you might be you say Q and then write your question, and then you say A and leave a spot for its response. Um, but half the time, what it would do is it would write your answer, and then it would write a question of its own, because many documents are in a Q&A format or whatever.
Right.
Um,
Right.
the other issue with a raw pre-trained model is that you are not going to have sort of the safety standards that you want, and so it's another thing applied during post-training. So again, if you purely have like I just write out the rest of what I think this document is, then you could just write, title. accurate and easy instructions to build a bomb, with using only things you can buy at Home Depot or something. And then it will faithfully write the rest of that document. And so post-training is where you teach it not to do that.
Yeah.
Got it.
The kind of the behavior end.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. That's fascinating. So when we talk about AI in the enterprise, there's this huge wave of optimism. 84% of business leaders say AI is going to transform their industry, and that's massive. But here's the reality. 93% of them are struggling to actually make it work. That's the gap, and that's exactly what Dell AI Factory with NVIDIA is built to close. Dell calls it the world's broadest AI portfolio, and that's not marketing fluff. We're talking everything from AI-ready PCs to servers, storage, networking, services, all designed to work together. But what really matters is this. They've already helped implement more than 3,000 real-world AI deployments. This is proven operational AI. They don't just drop hardware at your doorstep and wish you luck. Dell brings expert services at every single stage: strategy, deployment, scaling, so you're not stuck in pilot mode wondering why nothing's moving. If your organization believes AI is the future, but you're still trying to bridge that execution gap, check out the Dell AI Factory with NVIDIA. Learn more today at dell.com/yourway to AI. That's dell.com/yourway to AI. So what makes a good environment versus just writing test cases? Like what are the difference in a good and bad environment?
What you want is for it to be something you can train a model in.
Mhm.
And the two things that sort of feed into that are difficulty and realism, because
Mm.
it's not helpful. I mean, you can train a model to do whatever you want, um, but if you're not training it to something that's like valuable in the real world, then it's just a waste of GPU. This is what we see with LM Arena, where when labs train on it, it makes the model worse because you're sort of optimizing for a signal that's incredibly noisy. And so in the same sense, it's very important that our environments be highly realistic and that they, match reality. And so like one way that you do that, for instance, is you have this expert network. And so if you're trying to build, say, the customer support or like the finance environment, you need to have people who have that job in real life tell you like what type of tasks do they do, how are those tasks judged, what are the tools that they use, right? So like if you have like your Bloomberg terminals or like your Zendesk or whatever.
Yeah.
um so yes, you got to do all that. You got to make sure the difficulty is correct. So if it's way too hard, there's nothing for the model to learn, like because it can't even, to take back to the golfing example. um let's say that you're on like some, I don't know, this is like the limits of my golf knowledge, but I feel like on Pebble Beach, like there's some part where like you have the option to hit the ball like totally over the water.
Yeah.
And let's
Mm.
let's say that like, you're not a very, like you're a total beginner golfer, and nothing you do gets over the water. Like you're just, it's, you can try 100 times, you're not going to get it once. You're not learning from that because you never have the successful attempt to say, oh, that was the thing I needed to do.
Yeah.
So much the same way, if it's too hard, you're not going to learn. And if it's too easy, you're not going to learn because you're not pushing
Right.
yourself. So we
And
have to test it on real models today and calibrate it. And then as the models evolve, we need to evolve with them and continue to make the environments harder. Um, and the way that we test all this is by doing our own training runs. So we train with open weights models and we see the improvements that our environments have. And then, what you really want to see is not just that it improves on your own environment, but that it improves on other benchmarks as well. So that there's like some transferability of like we're teaching general skills and not just like some niche thing that maybe isn't realistic.
So what would the ultimate RL environment look like? Would it be something like OpenClaw where the agent controls an entire computer? Or would it be like an actual synthetic world, like a synthetic golf course, for example, and you have like something like Google's Genie? Or is it robots navigating the real world and that's the ultimate environment? What do you think?
Yeah. So I think you can get quite far without anything in the physical world.
Cool.
Um,
nice.
I mean, just if you think about like during COVID, think about how much work we all got. Think about how much work we all got done without like leaving our home offices, right? Like you can do a
Right.
lot on just your laptop. And so I think in much the same way, like if you had, I think the genius in a data center that can't ever do a real world meetup is sufficient to radically reshape society.
Mm.
Um, that said, I mean, once the robots are here, then that'll also be a big deal. Um,
Yes.
so what does it look like? I mean, does it look like OpenClaw? No, I think it looks like more than that because like OpenClaw on its own is just like on one person's computer. OpenClaw could, but it doesn't necessarily have access to like the entire company's worth of data. And
Right.
to, it's sort of like there's the environment aspect, but there's also the tasks you're doing within the environment. And there's substantial effort that goes into making sure that these tasks are um, like realistic and graded well. Like because you need to give a reward signal to the agent telling it like what's a good job on this task. And the quality of the training is only as good as the quality of the reward signal.
Mm.
And so, so yeah, something like OpenClaw, like that's just sort of one piece.
Oh, wow.
Got it. Got it.
That's really interesting, and it leads me to wonder, like, I assume, the little comment there about robots being a big interesting thing. Seems like autonomous cars could also unlock a lot of capability.
Yeah, I mean, I love Waymo every time I go to San Francisco. I take as many Waymos as I can.
I love them. I was so much less scared than I expected to be the first time I did it.
Well,
Oh, let's see
Surge
here.
builds RL environments like CoreCraft, right? Where
Yeah.
it's the simulated e-commerce company where AI agents work customer support. Why did you focus on this area? And you released a benchmark to go with it as well. Is that right?
Yeah. So there are so many different areas. We're working on a bunch more that we haven't released publicly, but that we've just deployed to clients.
Cool.
Um, Really, what we're looking at in terms of how we prioritize our work with clients is looking at the intersection of economically valuable work for AIs to be doing and places where it could be deployed reasonably easily. So,
Mm.
you could imagine medical environments, we're definitely doing some work in that space, but there are just a lot of regulatory barriers to deploying really any sort of technology into healthcare.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
if you have something else like, finance, where those firms are like super hungry and are, willing to be adventurous to generate alpha, like that is sort of a great intersection of things for us to target.
That makes sense. And
It
which
does.
labs are using Surge right now?
Unfortunately, contractually, we're not allowed to talk about
Oh,
specific customers, but I'll say, we work with the Frontier Labs and we work with other labs that are not Frontier Labs.
Awesome.
cool.
Awesome. Your research, I thought this would be interesting to chat about a little, showed that even the best frontier models fail about 40% of the time on workplace tasks, w and that they clustered, if I'm not mistaken, around, like, tool use, planning, adaptability. Which of the which of those is the hardest to teach AI?
Yeah, so one thing that's really interesting about training AIs, and you'll see this also in the finance report that we did, where
Mm.
we gave three models, Gemini, Claude, and ChatGPT, like professional finance tasks, is that with humans, generally, if someone can like do some really deep analysis, they can also make a PowerPoint. But with models, it's not necessarily the case. Like you sort of
Right.
see failures all up and down the stack. Um, and so you'll sort of have like, a model like do an amazing job of some calculation and then just like not make the slides. Um, so that's been one interesting thing is like it's not really the case that there's sort of one area and you like solve that area and then it's done forever. Like instruction following, you just
Mm.
dump a bunch of data into instruction following and then you never need to think about it again. Or personality, or being grounded in the factual materials presented. Like that's part of why we're so bullish on RL environments is that it really exercises all that stuff at the same time. Because if you make a mistake in any one of those dimensions, you're going to fail the task. And so
Mm.
you sort of protect against regressions as opposed to older training regimes that would like really focus on just one of those slices. So yeah, in terms of what's the hardest to train the model, the hardest things to train are the things that are hardest to verify. So the reason
Mm.
that models are really good at math and code is because there are a lot of verifiable outcomes. in those
Proofs and
domains.
whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah, like did the code run?
Yeah.
Yep.
But then imagine something like a model writing a textbook. Like,
Ooh.
how are you going to verify the quality of a textbook, right? Are you going to have a person read 300 pages? And, even then, it's like, okay, well, maybe you didn't like the textbook, but when students actually use it, they go out into the real world and they're much more proficient at the skill. It's like,
Yeah.
are you going to run that experiment? Are you going to generate 1,000 model trials of running textbooks and then teach 10,000 different students? Like, no, like
No.
obviously it's not going to scale. So like, there's a really deep research problem we're working on, which is how do you verify increasingly open-ended problems in a
Philosophy.
way, yeah, exactly, in a way that's like stable and is tracking the real world value that we care about.
Wow. That's a
I,
real problem and something I hadn't considered before, that the creative issues, things like that, where there aren't where there's not a fundamental right and wrong,
Yeah,
left or right, runs or doesn't run, that
yeah,
would be excessively complicated.
yeah, and you can even, I mean, humans have the same problem with training. Like again, to bring it back to VCs, you make a bunch of investments and like funds are 10 years long for a reason. Like you
right.
you actually don't know if you've made good investments for years. And so
Mhm.
that's a really hard feedback signal to learn from.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
really interesting.
The longer
Go
running
ahead,
the
Brent.
task is, yeah, the longer running the task is, I'm sure it's like the harder it is to test. I mean, it's the same problem with medicine, right? Where you have to do these long running human trials to figure out, does this thick pill that or procedure actually last the test of time, or does it kill you 3 years later?
You spend
So
10 years to find out, nope.
Right,
yeah.
right, exactly. Every
Oh,
every like longitudinal nutrition study. Um,
right,
but just like in biology, where people are working on cell simulators to be able to get around some of that, that is again the benefit of an RL environment is once you figure out how to verify these tasks, you have a simulated environment in which you can, you know, have many years of like simulation time compressed into a much shorter wall clock time, and then try to get
right.
some of that signal.
Okay, this brings me to actually one of my biggest questions, which is, which kind of came up in conversation here. Are you doing any testing with like multi-agent swarms? Like, I know this is kind of like the big hot topic. OpenClaw is talking about this a lot. There's even Multbook, which is like all of the agents talking to each other. Like, would you ever simulate? Would you try to simulate 1,000 people reading a textbook and how they actually react to it? And then I have a follow-up question on that, but I'll just let you react.
Yeah, I mean it's like the Codex app, that just recently came out where they're really having as a first class concern managing a swarm of agents. So yeah, I mean the simpler form is like what you see we published already with CoreCraft, where like you have one agent solving a customer support task at a time. But yeah, when you get more nuanced, it's things like a financial markets simulator where you have multiple agents that are all participating in the market at the same time and in real time. And yeah, you just see sort of who comes out on top. So yeah, that's definitely a very interesting area of research for us.
Related to that, do you have any sort of intuition or suspicion on whether or not the model that will be able to generalize across all of these different domains and be able to do a deep analysis and end a PowerPoint presentation, will that be a single model or will that be like 5 models that all work together? What's your take?
Yeah, yeah. So it's important to distinguish here. Like when people say multiple models, sometimes they literally mean like a new model has been trained to make PowerPoints, and sometimes they mean it's the same LLM that just has like a different system prompt. It's just sort of like an agent that's pointed towards a different subtask.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, the latter is absolutely a technique that is used a lot today. Just because just like humans, when you let an agent focus on something, it does a better job. Um,
Yeah.
I think, there was in 2023 a lot of debate over whether it was going to be small specialized models or large big models. And
Right.
the large model side of the debate has been winning for the last 3 years. So I
Okay.
definitely expect to see like we're just going to train one model that can both do PowerPoint and a complicated analysis.
Yeah. You're like, let's just bet on history. History has
Yeah,
proven
yeah,
that.
basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we saw you've tested around, 200 plus finance tasks with actual Wall Street experts grading GPT-5. I think it was Gemini 2.5 Pro, Sonnet 4.5. How did that go? What surprised you there? Any?
Yeah. So one thing we found, as you'll note in the write-up, like we had said, um, a lot of the models behaved as if they were solving an academic problem. And this is interesting, but actually not surprising at all, because, again, you are your objective function, right? Like you get what you're trained for. And a lot of benchmarks are fairly academic and contrived. And this is a natural consequence of the fact that building a benchmark is incredibly expensive. And a lot of them are being done sort of in academic contexts that don't have huge budgets. Um, and so, like, if you imagine, like, some of the questions that we were posing to the models here, they take a finance professional 20, 30, 40 hours to do. So in order to build a benchmark, hundreds of questions like that, you need to find enough finance professionals and you need to pay them to spend 20 to 30, 40 hours per task. And so, like, that's quite a lot. Um, and frankly, until you've made an investment in having a really deep expert network and a lot of technology to, produce great data with those people, it's just not feasible. And so that's why you see, a lot of benchmarks that have been used are like glorified like SATs. And so, that's why we see that the models sort of behave in a very academic way. But when you put these real world constraints on them, like there's sort of that last mile problem. I'll give you another example of this, which is many coding agents do not want to use external libraries unless you really force them to do so. Like if
Mm.
you say, I have a bunch of like, chess puzzles and I want you to write a program that's going to solve them. The obvious thing to do is to get Stockfish, just write a little
Yeah.
wrapper
Yeah.
and then spit that out, right? If you're saying like this is for a production system, I'm building a chess app, like yeah, just get Stockfish.
Yeah.
Models want
Don't
to make
build it
their
from
own chess
scratch.
solver. Yeah, they want to build it from scratch because that's what you would do like in an academic setting, right? Like you're not being tested on your ability to use Stockfish. Um, it's like those memes. Guys will do anything to avoid going to therapy. Uh, it's like,
Facts.
similarly, it's like coding models will do anything to avoid using the already perfectly good available library.
Yeah.
Um,
But I will say I kind of respect that with a situation like NPM where, it just got hacked with Shai Hulud. And I'm like, I don't want to use anything with NPM, as an amateur vibe coder, for
yeah,
lack of a
yeah, for
better word.
sure. And I do think it's a great feature of these models that we will be perhaps reaching for left pad less frequently
Hmm.
because you can just have the confidence that your model can write that 10-line function for you.
Yeah. Yeah. But it is interesting that they're like, yeah, I'm just going to do it myself instead of going for the most direct, most obvious answer.
Yeah.
Um,
But anyway, so to tie back to finance, like, yeah, what we see is like excellence on sort of the core thing you would do in school. But then when there are a lot of details, or especially when the task is structured not as I've given you everything in the prompt all neatly bundled up, but you need to go out into our environment and like search through our Confluence to find like our standard procedure for how we model this scenario. Check your email from a note for the VP that said, here's some other important context for how this analysis needs to be done. We got 5 different CSVs from the client. One of them is the relevant one. The other 4 are out of date now. Like when you add all that stuff in, that's where the models tend to fall apart.
yeah.
That
Makes
makes
sense.
sense. So I guess let's talk a little bit about, kind of the business end here. Should companies be investing in building their own RL environments and training their own models, or is that still a waste of resources in a lot of ways and maybe best left to frontier labs?
Yeah, so I will admit that, I work at a company that produces RL environments. And so if you're asking
Yeah,
me,
fair,
Right.
fair.
I'm
Bit
I'm gonna I'm
biased,
gonna
but
have a
that's
certain
fair.
perspective here. Um,
Yeah.
but I think my perspective is also correct. And now I will
Yeah,
share it. So, I think it really comes down to um what the factory your previous guest, the factory CTO, I
Mm.
think, was saying.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, where he was saying that making the code base agent ready has a huge impact. And like that absolutely matches what we've seen in our own research.
yeah,
And
Yeah.
so I don't think companies want to be building their own RL environments because there's a lot of work and infrastructure that goes into that is not really part of the core competency. What they should be doing is making their entire business agent ready.
Right.
And so that basically means that like you get it ready to plug into an RL environment so that you can train, even if you're not training a model per se, but like you're evaluating an agent, whatever AI solution you're using, you're evaluating it in this environment. So yeah, that could be things like making certain data sets available in an agent-friendly way. It could be thinking about what are existing workflows where we can separate out parts that are good for agents and parts that are good for humans. And it could also be just thinking, what is work that was never economically viable to do before, but now that agents exist, it is valuable to do.
That makes
Right.
sense.
And
There's
what about harnesses, I guess? Because we were hearing a lot about harnesses in the context of agents and we're wondering
and
if it's worth
benchmarking and
yeah, if it's worth companies building their own versus something off the shelf. I mean, do you have any insight into that and your perspective there?
Yeah, so it's similar to um, it's similar to the question of building RL environments in the first place. Like, if you're going to deploy an AI solution, you need an eval. If you
Mm,
don't have an eval, then you're basically just going off vibes. You're flying blind. And
right.
if what you're building, if it matters, if it's correct, and if it has more than like a tiny surface area, there's just no way to like you make a change to the system and then you try it 5 times and you're like, okay, it's better now. Like that's not going to be good enough for like these business use cases. So
Right.
you need to have some means of evaluating what you're doing, and then once you have that, um, yeah, maybe you're using sort of a community agent harness. A lot of them are very customizable. If you want to be sophisticated, maybe you're using just a drop-in solution, like they're like drop-in customer support agents. I
yeah,
think depending on the company's degree of technical sophistication and how bespoke their problems are, um,
yeah.
all of those things can make sense. But the way that they know where they need to be is having that great eval set, because otherwise, yeah, you're just guessing.
So why are eval sets so hard to create?
So one big challenge is reward hacking, which is where models will cleverly find ways to get the reward signal out of your environment that gives it a high score without actually doing the thing you want them to do.
Mm,
They sort of follow the letter, but not the spirit of the law. And so, for instance, if you have ever tried to do behavior modification on a small child, and you say something like, "Stop hitting your sister," and the child responds by kicking instead. It's like, well, you didn't tell me not to kick.
right.
Um, in much the same way, anytime that you give the model an objective function, what reinforcement learning is going to do is find the easiest way to achieve that goal. So you need to like think very carefully about designing it in such a way that's actually going to capture what you're looking for. And it has a bit of an adversarial nature to it because like you need to think about what would like a lazy but very clever person do for this. Um, I'll give you another example. Um,
I was gonna say you should hire me then because I feel like I'm a very lazy, clever person. So I feel like I would try to find the
yes,
easiest way to do stuff.
yeah,
Yeah, I
you
know.
know how they are. Um,
Yeah.
okay, so here's an example I like to use about reward hacking. Um, this is an instruction following prompt. You say, please write an 80-word summary of the importance of renewable energy in climate emissions, or in reducing carbon emissions. Use a sentence structure such that every sentence ends with a noun.
Mm,
And so you might think that the first sentence would be something like, we need to reduce emissions. But it's also possible the model would say, renewable energy plays a crucial part in reducing carbon emissions rapidly. Sustainability. Clean energy sources like tidal and geothermal create a greener future. Harmony. And it's like, obviously that's not a good sentence, but it is doing what you asked, which is
yeah.
ending every sentence grammatically correctly with a noun.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
so this is why you sort of need like multiple layers of rubrics. Um, and frankly, it's why like the way a lot of these reward signals are structured today is because the RL environment needs to run at a certain pace. It's a model does the work and another model judges the success.
Mm.
Cool.
And the way it judges the success is a human will write out a bunch of very concrete, specific criteria that the model is going to evaluate on.
Okay.
But it then becomes this game of like, okay, well, I have my verbal unit tests essentially. Is my test suite comprehensive enough that, I can capture all of these cases? Because a very literal minded judge will look at this and be like, yeah, I mean, follow the
Technically,
rules.
it passes. Yeah.
Right.
It did what
Yeah.
you told it. You
Right.
just told it poorly.
Exactly. And that's, when you see something like, there was I don't want to name names, but there was a model last year that got released that was, caused the company in question to do a lot of reorgs because the model was so bad.
I think I know which one you're talking about.
and it was trained on Ella Marina. And,
Mm.
it's like, yeah, like you said, the model is only doing what you tell it to do.
Yeah.
And, and it did a great job of optimizing for that reward signal. In my first computer science class, my professor said to us, you should never get frustrated with a computer because it can only do what you tell it to do.
I like
And,
that.
he was saying that in like a deterministic context, right? Of like, you literally wrote this code. But honestly,
Right.
it works even in a modeling context. Like, it's
Yeah.
only doing what we trained it to do.
Something I've wondered for a long time is, I mean, I remember the idea of a prompt engineer became kind of memey. However, I do genuinely believe that there is a difference in how you ask questions, and that we're finding language to play an important role in that, and the ability to get a different answer by understanding framing and how you've asked a thing. And I often wonder if the field isn't so dense with software engineers that they're missing some of that.
um, well, so part of the value we provide is by having a very diverse set of
Yeah.
AI trainers to sort of get
Right.
past that.
I like
Um,
that.
That's good. Yeah. What's your recommendation for someone who, is maybe starting to build their own evals and assess things? Like what do you do, or what's your perspective on the best way to eval or write evals, I guess?
Yeah, so essentially, the structure of an eval is like a set of golden answers where you have tasks and then you have what the expected outcome is. And as we were talking about earlier, the more interesting the task, the harder it is to construct that
Yeah.
because, like, the more open-ended the evaluation is.
Yeah.
And yeah, that does become substantially difficult. And frankly, like, many golden sets are wrong, right? Like it takes a lot of effort. And again, if you have like noise, then that really disrupts your development process. Um, you'll see when labs release new models, they talk about their benchmark scores. And sometimes you'll see it like for a certain benchmark, everything will cluster around 80%. And people will start to say, oh, the benchmark is saturated now. And when they say saturated, what they mean is there's nothing more for us to learn. Like the model is sort of as good as it's going to get. And sometimes it's because the benchmark has like a long tail of like really hard things, but sometimes it's because a lot of the tasks are just broken. And you start with the benchmark and you're like, okay, I expect 20% of these are busted. I just don't know which 20. And then you
Right.
train your model, you get to 80%, and you're like, oh, those were the 20.
There they
Um,
are. Yeah.
but that was giving you noise the whole way you were getting up there. So, one thing we do at Surge is we try to have 100% correctness, 100% tasks that actually work instead of just accepting this degree of noise. So that's probably like my biggest recommendation for people trying to build their own eval sets is to, you want to, I think there's a certain temptation where it's like building the eval set isn't fun. Building the agent is what's fun.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, you shouldn't skip your vegetables.
Yeah,
I
I've
love
been
it.
guilty of that for sure. Well, this all
Same.
leads me to ask another question, which is, do RL environments eventually replace benchmarks, or like in terms of agentic settings? Like, what's your take there?
Yeah, I mean, they can be benchmarks, right? Like at
Mm,
a high level, a benchmark is just a series of challenges for the model and scores. So RL environments are
right.
just a way to do that. And yeah, in the fullness of time, do most benchmarks become RL environments? I think it's certainly possible. Um,
Mm.
It's sort of like in software development where you have your test pyramid, where at the bottom of the pyramid you have your unit tests, which are very fine-grained and give you very specific feedback. And at the top of the pyramid, you have your integration tests, which test the whole system. And the reason it's shaped like a pyramid is that the integration tests are much more expensive and slow to run. And when something fails, you don't know exactly what the problem is necessarily. But they're also way less brittle than the unit tests because they are tracking sort of closer to your, end-to-end value. And so I sort of see different benchmarks as having different spots in that pyramid where, like, yeah, you need your RL environments to sort of track, like, okay, end of the day, can this thing be a lawyer? But
Right.
sometimes you want more specific benchmarks like instruction following or groundedness that will help you sort of tease out, like, okay, my latest model checkpoint had a big regression on the lawyer abilities, and it had a big regression on the instruction following abilities. So now I have a little more of a hypothesis for what to go investigate.
So, does this lead to then, say, a company comes to you, and obviously we won't use names, but with the model, does this happen in a way that's like, here's this new model. It's really good at this, but it's pretty weak over here on this kind of task. Can you help strengthen it there so it is more general?
Yeah, I mean that's what we've been doing for years. But it's often us telling them where it's strong and
Mm.
where
Okay.
it's weak.
So you're
Um,
benchmarking it and you're saying, hey, this is what we're seeing, and this is where you really need some help. And then that's where you kind of,
You need some law and some creativity, or you
that's
need
right. That's
some
right. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and typically the way that our engagements start is people will come to us and say, like, here's my checkpoint. Like, can you just tell me like where we need to go, sort of in your opinion? And they value sort of like the third party audit, so to speak. And
Yeah.
then we run all of our evals and we say, hey, yeah, here's where you're strong, here's where you're weak. And then here's the train data we're going to give you that's going to help you hill climb in the areas where you need to improve. And then then they train, they give us another checkpoint, we rerun the eval, and then we're like, okay, you fix those problems. Now here's your next biggest set of things. And you just sort of keep doing that until you're ready to ship.
Forever. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
basically. Yeah,
And
you
I
keep
get
doing it forever.
and
Yeah,
every so often you stop, ship, and do it again all over, and,
yeah, yeah, exactly.
okay. So Surge bootstrapped its way to
Yeah,
1.2 billion essentially, working with top labs, no funding is my understanding, or at least VC funding?
correct.
Okay. How does that, place you a little more in the long term when you think about building AGI and whatever's next? Is the hope that you're going to hit this goal and then continue moving on past that? Maybe that's a poor way to ask it.
Yeah.
Are you trying
Yeah.
to make yourselves irrelevant by making the perfect model, or is there always going to be a harder challenge for you? That's just scale will require you to solve.
Yeah. So, to answer first the beginning of the question, I also just want to clarify 1.2 billion refers to our revenue, not our
Yeah, that's awesome.
valuation.
Ooh,
Yeah,
my
yeah,
Um,
that's
apology.
oh, I mean,
we saw that, and I wanted to make sure it was correct because that's
yeah,
good.
yeah, yeah. Um, so yeah, I mean, we've been bootstrapped from the beginning. We've been profitable from the beginning, and it's something that people like to say like companies are an embodiment of their founder, and
Mm.
like this is very much a reflection of Edwin, the CEO, and the way he wants to run the company. He really values his autonomy. He does not want to be acquired. Um, and he cares deeply about building AGI in a safe and valuable way. And, again, sorry to my VC friends, but like a nice way to do that is to not have any external pressure from anyone,
Mm.
looking for you to hit a certain valuation in your next fundraise, to show quarterly results, to pivot if the thing you're doing isn't working and they don't have patience. Um, So, that was really the path that he chose to really give him the freedom to do that. And because, the business was basically immediately successful, there was just never really a need to.
That whole ethos almost feels like the science and business worlds colliding a little.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's like, Edwin wanted to found like a research lab that happened to make money. Um, as
That's a
as a
bonus.
yeah, exactly. Um, but as opposed to like I don't know. Yeah, some people are not like that. Anyway,
Yeah.
we're moving on to your next question about sort of like what the future holds. If you talk to AI researchers, they'll say that they can hill climb on anything that has a good eval. Hill climbing just being the process of like you keep making iterative changes and you see when you're getting better. The problem, as we've been discussing a bunch here, is like the challenge of making those evals. And so Surge essentially is hill climbing as a service, where we give you an eval to know where the top of the hill is, and then we give you the training data to climb that hill. And the future I see for us is just providing increasingly sophisticated evals, environments that match even more ambitious real world tasks that we want the models to perform. So it's like, yeah, doing that deep research to figure out how are we going to make these models amazing textbook writers? Like that's a big open question, and it's one that we're really excited to pursue.
What then is your, I guess, your timeline for when we'll see agents that can handle, I mean, most knowledge work without human supervision? I mean, you're basically setting the pace here, it feels like.
Yeah, so I will make a prediction that this is, just to be totally clear, my personal take and not the stance of Serge.
Fair
But
enough.
I think that by 2030, there is a 50% chance that we will see a company worth $1 billion that has one human employee.
Wow.
I don't doubt that.
I
That's
yeah, I
fascinating.
wouldn't be
Crazy
surprised.
to
Yeah.
think of, though, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, anyway, so that's sort of my calibration for how long I think it's going to take a lot of knowledge work to be doable by AI agents. And just to
Mhm.
put a little more color on that, if you look at 2025, we had massive progress in coding agents, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember using the prototypes that were available, you know, over Christmas break 2024, January 2025. And like they were a research novelty. It was like I'm impressed you were able to do this. This is not close to being something I would want to use, in my day to day.
Yeah.
Um and by the end of the year, uh they're so good that people are, talking seriously about like do we not need to open our code editors anymore? Because like
Right.
you just talk
Yeah.
to agents all day.
Well, on
And I
that
see
point, have
no
you
yeah.
tried Opus 4.5? Do you think it's the
Oh yeah.
same step function change that everyone else thinks? What's your
Yeah, I mean
take on
I've
that?
I've logged I've logged hundreds of hours on Opus 4.5. Um
Nice.
yeah, no, it's extremely good. Um and I mean especially in the last part of the year. Uh, you know, getting the 4.1 Claudes and then the 4.5 Claudes, each one was like a really noticeable step up. And
Mm.
and in conjunction with Claude Code also having a lot of improvements. And yeah, I don't see any reason that this is going to slow down in 2026. But
From
then, yeah,
anyone, even, I
yeah,
would say. It's like they're all right now moving like lightning. It's crazy.
yeah. And
Uh,
then to tie back to your question about knowledge work generally, on software engineering, we've had, a full year, a very long time to get used to this idea that agents are going to do a ton of our work. But the question is, how generalizable is this going to be to other fields? Like when you make the elite tier coding agent that can sort of do any coding task a human could do, is it going to turn out that like, yeah, and then with only 6 more weeks of work, you also have the elite tier tax prep. And then 3 weeks after that, you have, the elite tier customer support or recruiter or whatever. Um, and it could be that people in those industries that like aren't, like if you don't have a software engineer in your life, you like might not realize how fast this stuff is going. And it might be, if it generalizes really well, that these agents are going to come like ripping out of software engineering and then just like remake other industries at an absolutely dizzying pace.
That's what I feel like is going to happen. But I mean, there's a lot of user experience stuff that needs to get solved for regular people to really
yeah, I've
be able to.
wondered even the opposite,
Mm.
that like, and I'm gonna take this back to Claude specifically, because with Claude 3.5, I felt like it was one of the best writing models around at that time. But as they became more ingrained in the engineering community, I feel like it lost the edge that made it that good. Now, I think a lot of that's back in 4.5 in a neat way. But I do think that as they leaned farther into one thing, it almost sometimes feels like it's leaning out of others.
Yeah. So So this is like, so a classic vibes-based take, right? Of just like you've
Yes,
spent a
absolutely
ton of
vibes
time with
based.
these
Yeah.
models. Yeah, which I do too, right? I mean, we all do it. Um, but we at Surge are actually about to release a creative writing benchmark.
Ooh.
And
Ooh.
I don't know if we're gonna test it on 3.5 because it's a little older, but this is something that like makes me really excited because like, yeah, I'll have some vague sense of like I do kind of think Claude is better at writing than ChatGPT. But this benchmark will allow us to, in a much more robust and like scientific way, sort of put something behind those intuitions. So once that gets released, I'm gonna follow up with you about whether
Please.
3.5, how it scores.
Please,
Yeah.
yeah,
Send it our
I'd love
way.
to see how it scores and how they all do, and the truth is, it's also there are a million different types of writing. There's technical
Right.
writing, there's journalism, there's blog writing, newsletter writing, script writing, uh, creative writing, poetry, and,
To say nothing of the different tastes, how taste plays into judging all of
yeah,
that.
and I'm really curious to see how they eventually fare among different types, because I have a suspicion that maybe some will be better at creative, but others might be really good at technical writing or might be really good at legal writing or something.
Yeah, absolutely. And to Grant's point about taste, that is something that is underdeveloped right now, is the
Yeah.
Mm.
recognition of taste clusters. And like, you can prompt the model and say like, be concise or whatever, but there is a certain extent to which the current training regimes that a lot of labs are using is kind of like a lowest common denominator. Like we're just gonna find sort of a one size fits all approach. And if
Yeah.
you
Mm.
take that to the limit, then like everything becomes the Avengers. Which, whatever. I love Captain America. Like I'm not but like, there's more to art than the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Um,
Right.
and so that's another like deep open research question that we're focusing on is how do you teach the model about these existence of these taste clusters and then, find sort of natural ways to like have it pick up on, oh, this is someone who, really likes Hemingway's writing style. Um, yeah.
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 That's a great question, and I think it's a more complex thing than a lot of, and I only think of it so much this way because, I've been a writer for 20 years. It's kinda, it's been my specialty, and it's a really common thing to have people come and be like, "Oh, this is writing. We'll take it to him." And it's like, "Hey, just because this person does this doesn't mean they know the first thing about writing a script or the or a
Mm.
poem," you know?
Right, right. Or it's like, you meet like a lawyer at a party and you ask them some legal question. And they're
Yeah.
like, yeah, that's like a real estate law question, which is like totally different from like
I
estate
have
Completely.
planning
no
or
idea.
whatever. Yeah, it's like completely unrelated.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Could you ever make an RL environment that's like clusters of tastes? Like people who like these, 6 books, like will like this type of writing. Like, could you ever like train for taste?
Yeah. And I mean, I think like there are a lot of questions architecturally of how you sort of present that information to the model. Like,
Mm.
we have very sophisticated algorithms to identify taste clusters, right? Like, Netflix obviously has a recommender algorithm where it's like figures
Right.
out people who like one show might like another. Um, and so the question for me is like, how much do you try to bake that into the LLM itself versus how
Mm.
much do you have like another system that sits alongside it, um, that sort of makes some of those judgments in a more specialized way and then tells the LLM or sort of gives it some prompting that's going to nudge it into a certain distribution.
Like, that's
Would
maybe
that be
trained on you and your preferences or something.
yeah, like
Yeah,
custom styles, like Anthropic has that, right? Like, yeah. Or you can like give it your custom style and like say like I want you to write in this style and you can give it as many instructions as you want.
exactly. And like, we have things like that today. I just think that they're going to get so much better.
Yeah.
Um, like today, like I can give the LLM a lot of my own writing and then ask it to write like me, and like I feel like I can tell the difference. Um, but like I think there will come a time when I won't be able to.
I think you're probably right. If you were gonna say whether there's I know you've talked about how this all seems to be moving fast and doesn't show any signs of slowing down, but if you were to think of one area as more of a bottleneck than others, Would you say that's models themselves, quality of RL environments, maybe reward signals, or something else that we're not talking about enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really does come down to the reward signal. Um, and part of it though is also just the scaling problem of like a lot of sort of, I mean, in 2023, people would put a prompt into a model and they would get an answer in 90 seconds, at the most, and they'd be thrilled with that response. And now we want models to do things that would take a human a week or a month. And like that's a very hard problem to figure out how to scale and to sort of construct those tasks because, think about, I don't know, making an assignment for a student. If it takes you, the expert, a week to do something, that's just the time it takes you to do the task. But now you also need to come up with like the grading rubric. And you need to make sure like, okay, I knew what I wanted the task to be, but did I actually write all those instructions down properly? Or like would a reasonable student take different interpretations that would then not line up with the grading rubric I wrote? So if it takes you a week to do the task, that's just the baseline. And now you got to do way more work to actually make this, something you can teach someone with. So
Yeah.
yeah, just figuring out how to scale all that, is a pretty substantial bottleneck right now.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's fair. Yeah. Okay, got a random one for you before we go.
Yeah.
Why do the models love M dashes so much and colons and titles? Why can't they write a complete sentence? I feel like they hate complete sentences.
Yeah. So
Can
there
can you
are a
fix
number.
that?
Yeah, so there are a number of like model smell things like that, like just sort of
Mhm.
these weird quirks. Um, One thing it can come out of is training on synthetically generated data,
Mm.
where the synthetic data is insufficiently diverse. Um, so we saw a model checkpoint one time that like you would ask it to write like a 5 paragraph essay, and every single paragraph was like starting with, like in high school, a very rigid formula you get, right? It
Yeah.
was like start with what you want to say in the paragraph and then say it and then end with the conclusion, sort of restating what you said. And
Yeah.
like there's a reason that when most of us graduate from 11th grade, like we move beyond that structure.
Yeah.
So it's not actually what you want, but because this lab had trained on a ton of synthetic data that was generated in precisely that format, and said, oh well, it's like, well, we don't have quality, but we do have quantity, so let's just spit out a ton
Yeah.
of this. Then yeah, the model sort of overlearns that that's what good writing looks like.
And I've wondered
Yeah,
before if, when you look at like the M Dash's AP style, it's so like every Associated Press article written in the last 100 years at a rate of hundreds a day around the world have had an M dash after the byline. They use M dashes throughout the article. Same with
yep,
Reuters and some others. And I think, God, you absolutely would have needed to have read tons of news.
right,
Uh, I
right,
thought it's probably also shows as a marker of good writing.
yeah, yeah, exactly right. If it's commonly associated with what otherwise looks like good writing, then yeah, you'll sort of see some of those vestigial
Yeah.
structures get picked up. Um,
Yeah. I guess I
the
always
other,
think it
yeah,
with the M dash specifically just because it's such a niche piece of punctuation that
not
normal
anymore.
people don't
Yeah,
use.
not anymore.
Not anymore.
Yeah,
Wait, that's been fixed. Everybody knows what an M dash is now.
yeah.
Oh.
Well, I mean, it's sort of interesting because it gets into like watermarking stuff too, where
Yeah.
it
Mm.
is genuinely useful for society to know if something is produced by a model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to the extent that labs actually leave that in, like, it's actually kind of nice for them to do that.
Yeah. Because then it gives you the
I
human
get that.
indication, like, okay, this is slop. I'm not going to read it.
Right, exactly.
And it's the humans who are like, "Get that out of here so nobody knows I used AI to write this."
Right,
Yeah.
right,
But it
right,
ensures
exactly.
human in the loop because you're editing out all the M dashes.
Yeah, yeah.
um,
Oh my gosh.
is it possible, do you think, with the current architecture to train for diversity? Because right now, my understanding is that it's sort of like the models lean into the middle, right? It leans to like what's most in distribution, like to your earlier point about lack of diversity in the train data. Can you ever actually steer it towards diversity and having diversity be like a key part of it in terms of like start so your sentences always start a different way and it's always like the creativity part of it, I guess I'm wondering.
Yeah, so this is a big open research question. By default, yeah, the models are collapsed. Like they will say very consistent things. For instance, Claude loves Marcus Chen. I don't know who Marcus Chen is, but if you
This
ask
is the guy.
Claude to, for instance, generate 1,000 fake resumes, and you ask it to do it sort of in sub agents, so like each Claude does not know what the other resumes are. You're gonna get 700 Marcus Chen resumes.
I got a
Um,
David Chen and an Amy Chen one night working on an idea for a story. It was like, how about if we name him David Chen? And I
right?
haven't seen a Marcus, but like CHEN it was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
same. Now, of course, the CEO of our company is named Edwin Chen. So no conspiracy theories there, but
Maybe Surge is involved. Maybe it's an inside
right?
job.
Maybe.
Accidentally scooped up personnel files.
Right, exactly. But yeah, so that is sort of the challenge is like the model gets some idea in its head that like the archetypical person is named Marcus Chen, and like the second most likely person to exist is named Priya Patel.
Mm.
And yeah, it is hard to like get them out of that. And like right now you can do it with prompting and sort of other techniques. But yeah, I think sort of big open research question to see like, I mean, this is what temperature is for, right? Like the
Uh-huh.
temperature inference setting. But of course you crank that up too much and it's going to stop following instructions or get zany in other ways. So figuring out ways to get them sort of more generative and creative without sort of losing groundedness.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's going to be something we're going to be working on for a long time.
I bet you're
Well,
right.
keep us posted when you solve it, because we'll shout to the rooftops and let people know it was you.
Absolutely.
Yes, I will. I will.
Well, Nick, thank you so much for joining us today. I realize we're right at your time, and I want to be respectful of that. Thank you for really pulling back the curtain on kind of what's happening in the post-training world. And where should people go if they want to dive into your research, read your blog, learn more about Surge?
Yeah, so we're on surgehq.ai. We publish a lot of stuff on our blog there. Um, you can follow me on Twitter at Nick Heiner. I don't post that often, so there won't be that much there.
Well, we sure hope you enjoyed today's show. If you don't already, please take just a moment to like and subscribe so we can continue bringing the people building AI today, like Nick. Pop over to the Neuron.ai as well and sign up for our daily newsletter if you're not already a subscriber. And that's it for today. Please remember to go check out our sponsor for today's video, Dell AI Factory with NVIDIA at dell.com/yourwaytoAI. That's dell.com/yourwaytoAI. And on that note, farewell for now, humans. We'll see you next time.